Thank you.
Hi, thanks. I would like to first thank everybody for coming and for Sylvia Ioannou Foundation for inviting us, making this great conference happen. Today, I will talk about how actually people talked about a lot of aspects of Corsairing, and they will talk about that. But today I will talk about how actually modern Ottoman historians consider Ottoman Corsairs based on contemporary works and a little bit of a methodological framing of theirs. Well, first, what I want to do is to, criticize this wrong assumption that see Corsairs as part of who were part of this larger imperial rivalry between the Ottomans and the Habsburgs, while they were coming from this very diverse cultural and religious backgrounds. They were portrayed by modern Ottoman historiography as holy warriors who carried the banner of Islam while fighting against the infidels. And this is a gross misrepresentation of a group of entrepreneurs with diverse religious and ethnic background operating in a borderland with fluent boundaries. We see this important paradigm, it's called the Gaza paradigm in Ottoman historiography, that dominated the Ottoman historiography, early Ottoman historiography since 1938, when a British historian named Paul Wittek tried to explain the exceptional rise of the Ottomans from a small principality to a world empire by this holy war paradigm. Well, Wittek's paradigm has been criticized by several historians, first among them Jamal Kafadar, who pictured Ottoman Ghazis belonged to a more inclusive milieu. Ottoman historiography on Corsairs imported this Wittek's very simplistic idea of a Gaza by comparing the Ottoman Corsairs with the early Ottoman raiders, and by portraying them as holy warriors carrying the banner of Islam. Especially, you can see that this paradigm, this penchant, especially works produced in Turkey, who portray Corsairs as sea Ghazis. And rather than studying these sea raiders within the general trends of the Mediterranean history, Ottoman historians fell prey to Ottoman exceptionalism by detaching the issue of Ottoman Corso from the larger framework in which it operated. And they try to explain it by concepts peculiar to Ottoman historiography, Ottoman history, and developed by Ottoman historians. You can see that in Idris Bostan's works, Halinologic's works, and an early work by Ilter, actually. And here the issue is not whether the concept of Gaza existed. It most certainly did, especially in the 16th century. We know it's been used by contemporary sources. The issue is how this concept should be understood, to what extent it signified a holy war as we understand today, and to what extent we could these depictions of Gaza at face value, to what extent we should differentiate between fact and propaganda. And while dealing with Corsairs, neither of the aforementioned points seems to be taken into account, and we don't see this very elaborate take on the Gaza issue. We simply have holy warriors fighting for religion. And this Gaza paradigm in the contemporary sources comes from this particular work, Gazavat Hayrettin Pasha, commissioned by Barbarossa himself, and talking about the deeds of Hayrettin Pasha, which actually, this is the first work on Ottoman Corsairs that actually were written by the Corsairs themselves, and influenced the treatment of Ottoman Corsairs in subsequent Ottoman histories. And this work in itself portrays the Ottoman Corsairs as holy men, when there are so many references to religiosity expressed within the framework of Gaza, like this Oruç, who is probably not very much knowledge in Islam, appears in contact with holy men, and he could foresee the future by religious connections, and even the Orthodox priests who engage in religious discussions with him are afraid of his knowledge, which we could presume, in fact, should not be true, because a mere Corsair would not be Islam, a Muslim scholar, but that was portrayed that way. And Ottoman sources who did not pay too much attention to these Corsairs until they became part of the Ottoman Empire directly imported these accounts. However, this insistence on Gaza, or the Ghazi Corsairs, should be taken with a pinch of salt. First of all, it's a propaganda piece. I wrote piece wrongly, sorry about that. And which Turks are bad in English. It's a propaganda piece that would like this, frame Corsairs within the paradigms that the Ottomans would understand. So they were newcomers in the Ottoman capital. So this Gaza paradigm have dominated the Ottoman historiography since the late 15th century in writing. So they framed themselves within this framework of Gaza in order to, you know, better adapt to the Ottoman culture, Ottoman political culture. So we have, this was intended for an Ottoman audience regarding the Ottoman audience in the capital expressed itself within the established traditions and protocols of Ottoman history writing. And a second, even in Gazavat, there are clues that attest to a heterogeneous frontier world where the propagation of religion seemed not to be the major concern. So for instance, I would like to go into the language which shows all these weird, Venetian and, Italian and French words that you cannot see in a proper Ottoman text. So most of you don't know Ottoman, so I will pass that. And, if you want to go, but all these weird expressions, you can just, this is a very particular text that stands out of this Ottoman manuscript culture. And some of them really are funny, actually, like Bashal Kaminat Prezan of Altare. It took me quite a time what the hell that meant, but, Mistar Fino Christian, I don't know, it's probably Mistar Fino, I don't know. He's a good Christian, maybe, or a fine Christian, I don't know what it is. So, therefore, what my suggestion is, instead of taking Ottoman sources that depict these Corsairs as Ghazis and accepting the modern historiography's simplistic treatment of the concept of Gaza, here I put Kafadar's inclusive Gaza to a different space, but most of the time we are talking about a very simplistic treatment of the concept. Instead of doing that, we may go and juxtapose these sources with European archival sources, and two, which I will use today, is the Venetian and the Spanish sources, and some primary sources, Sanudo, Aedo, Oshariev, Cervantes, Albert, these are mostly in print since the 19th century. And what we see is a heterogeneous band of entrepreneurs coming from a diverse background, operating in North Africa in 1510s and 1520s. And, some were Muslims from the Levant with a little bit of a Greek blood, like, second generation Muslims, there's this Greek tradition. Some were first generation Muslims born from the Levant, Barbarossa among them. Uprooted Catholic converts from the northern Mediterranean islands, mostly Corsica, Sardinia, and Sicily, which Antonio Sosa frames as Turco de profesión, Turk by profession. So, And there were Andalusians that helped a lot in these raids in the Western Mediterranean, and even some Jews. And actually, Antonio Sosa depicts Algiers, there's this really good quotation, that including people from 52 different lands. And he says, there is no single Christian nation you cannot find in Algiers at the time. So it's a very... And we know that even when these guys came to Istanbul, they had a hard time blending in. They had no education at all. They didn't know Turkish culture, and they come from non-Turkic background. For instance, Hassan Veneziano, a future Grand Admiral, knew only 25 words in 1577. That was the year when he became this governor of Thessalonica, and months later, the governor general of Algiers. So he knew not. Ulucali, the most important of all, couldn't read, neither in Ottoman nor in Italian. And after many years in the capital, even when he was considered a respectable Ottoman Pasha, now he's a settled Ottoman Pasha at the end of his career, he always expressed his desire to go back to North African frontier where the money is. So you see. And we see, in spite of this, the Ottomans on the one hand, the Habsburgs on the other, the political panorama in North Africa was not 100% Christian versus Muslim. We know that Habsburgs had several Muslim allies, and such as Tunis. We also know Corsairs cooperated closely with Christian powers, such as the French ports, and I will talk about that later. Corsairs fought with most Muslim rulers in the region, Tunis, Tlemcen. They invaded these countries who were allied to these Christian officers. And moreover, on a personal level, you know that most of the renegade Corsairs kept their relationship with their families, friends, and more important, their monarchs intact. So I have an article coming up about that, but it's not published yet. And we know that French, especially with French, the Corsairs had really established relations. We know that the Ottoman fleet, led by Hayrettin, wintered in Toulon in 1543. We know that French ships accompanied the Ottoman fleet when they were raging the Tyrrhenian and Ligurian seas. We know the Ottoman-French did join operations in support of Corsican rebels. The 32 French galleys were present in the Algerian siege of Methil Kebir, and there were also close commercial relationships, especially between Marseille and Algiers. So much so that when Marseille refused to bow down to Henry de Navarre, the Ottomans ordered the Governor General of Algeria to convince the Marseillaise, and failing that, use force. And we know that there's a French consulate in Algiers, to be followed by others in Tripoli and Tunis, and Ottomans ordered Algerians to help against the Spaniards. And also there was this trust issue. We know that after Lepanto, when Algerians were really afraid of an impending coming up Habsburg attack, and they realized that Istanbul couldn't protect them, they even discussed offered French king to take them under his suzerainty, like protection. And it's still indicative that this kind of an offer is even being contemplated, let alone made. And the French king refused, but only because the French ambassador in Constantinople insisted that he should refuse. And rumor had it, according to a Spanish document from Simancas, that the French even considered leaving garrisons in Algiers, Beaune, and the newly conquered Tunis in 1571. And we know that the Corsairs did not have always this nice relationship with the Muslims, and Barbarossa's brothers started, for instance, their careers under the aegis of the Tunisian Sultan, but then turned against this Tunisian Sultan and, started fighting with him. Even though, is this Barbarossa's, spirit coming? Even though it was the Algerian people themselves who invited Barbarossa brothers to come and rule Algiers, soon the people and the Corsairs ran into problems. Hayrettin executed the leader of Algerian notables, such as Selim el-Toumi. He then attacked Tenis and Tlemcen. Actually, Oruç was killed after he after he conquered the Muslim fortress. And he was killed by Christians, allied to the Muslims. So it would tell you how this frontiers thing works. And we know that we know of two Corsair descent upon Tunis in 1534 and 1569, and we know about expeditions into Morocco, and we know that the Corsairs did not give much substantial help to Moriscos, another typo on my behalf. So this Christian-Muslim thing, that does not work well. And we know on a personal level that these guys, these renegade guys, mostly coming from Christian background, all Corsairs did not come from Christian background, but most did, could not forsake their past. And recent studies on conversion tell us that the converts are having trouble severing ties with their past, retaining their familial relations, continuing using their maternal tongues, and keeping traces of their former faith, and even retaining their clothing habits. Moreover, these guys built alliances and established political networks, the Corsairs, alongside common geographical, ethnic, and linguistic origins. So we know that they actually, Sardinians, allied with Sardinians. These are all, Tobias Graf's dissertation talks about that very nicely, that renegades have these all geographical, ethnic, and linguistic alliances, groups. And thanks to European sources, we can recover negotiations of defection between Corsairs and European agents. Okay, so could these renegade guys be lured back into Christianity with a part of the Ottoman fleet, and of course during a battle? So there were a number of negotiations like that. And while some of these negotiations took place with renegades, thus the issues turning back to Christianity and obedience to one's natural monarch, so you're calling a Christian back, some was made with born Muslims, thus carrying a strictly political language. So some is about, in some of them you are negotiating with a Christian renegade, in the other, but we also have negotiations with a Muslim-born person for political reasons. Well, for the first, I can give you a couple of examples. One is a round of negotiations in the 1560s and 1570s that started in Algiers and went on in Istanbul between a number of Habsburg go-betweens, Spanish go-betweens, and Uluç Ali Pasha, a Calabrian renegade, and there's an article that comes up, still, it never comes up. Anyways, they made me write this in 15 days. It's been 9 months they didn't publish. Negotiations between Habsburg agents and Hassan Ağa, the Governor General of Algeria, in the 1540s, and negotiations between Habsburg agents and Jigalzade Yusuf Sinan Pasha, the Ottoman Grand Admiral and a Genoese renegade. So they all negotiated with these Christian monarchs, their former monarchs, in order to, both sides were trying to maximize their aim. But there were really material discussions. And we know that Habsburgs negotiated with Barbaros Hayrettin Pasha, and they also negotiated with Mehmet Pasha. This is not a very known episode, this one, the son of the renowned Corsair Salih Reis and former governor of Algeria. In none of these issues, conversion was not an issue, because they were about to fight, right? They were about to come back, and they didn't offer to come back to Christianity. They were Muslims, but they, negotiated their own terms. It is important to note that these born Muslims were not conflicted by their trans-imperial background, but they negotiated with rational calculations in mind. Even though none of these high-level negotiations bore any fruits, it is still indicative that these pashas entered into these negotiations. And some negotiated seriously, making promises and asking for arrangements. And some refused right away, like Uluç several times. He's really dismissive. He didn't like Philip II at all. But even those who did not accept, they did not give in these agents. They did not have them arrested, but they just let them go, or they did not allow the plot discovered. So, moreover, it should not be forgotten that some of similar negotiations bore fruit on medium and low-level officials who actually defected from one side to the other, and great diplomatic scandals. Right? Finally, a good number of these renegade corsairs served as informants and even saboteurs for Habsburg Secret Service, as documented by Spanish sources. So you know that it's not like these are all empty talks, but they provide other services, which was for which these governments paid too much money, which means that they really appreciated their service. So why Ottoman exceptionalism? Of course, a rhetorical question. The Ottoman historians are always exceptionalists. Whatever, the supermarkets in the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman creation. This insistence of portraying Ottomans, this insistence of portraying Ottoman sea Ghazis separately from the main currents of the Mediterranean history and the economy of piracy and ransoming stems from three intellectual tendencies. One is the reaction to the idea that the Ottoman civilization did not create something on its own, and it's something that goes back to the early 20th century, where we have Herbert Gibbon Fuat Köprülü discussion when this American guy insisted that the Ottomans could not create something, but they just used Byzantine heritage legacy, a theory which you may like, but it doesn't reflect the truth that much. So these, dumb Turks so the Fuat Köprülü responded, but there is still this defensive thing that, you see a similar sense of pride in literature, especially in Turkey, who portray these courses as Turkish seamen, a proof of the prevalent assumption, even among Turks prevalent, that the Turks are not a sailor nation. So we have these corsairs, and you will see in some, like Danishment, who's a brilliant historian in detail, he has an eye for detail, claim that Uluç is not a renegade at all. And this guy with French-Spanish in the 1950s, probably one of two guys with that, he still, denies that. Second is the theoretical reading of Ottoman diplomacy and foreign policy, and this stems partly from the nature of sources. While European sources such as ambassadorial dispatches, regular government reports, regional and narrative sources provide us with minute details regarding day-to-day politics, Ottoman sources are more formulaic. We have only mühimme in the archives, which are not very explicatory when it comes to political events. So these are like one-paragraph stuff. Not an effective chancellor leaving records of discussions in the divan. So we don't have any. We don't have. So we have a limited number of manuscripts, which is more literature than history. So it's not very explicatory. They are not very explicatory as well. Most of them inedited also. So we're relying on a very no source base. Thus, Ottoman diplomacy is studied along the theoretical formula between Dar al-Islam, abode of Islam on the one hand, and the Dar al-Harb, abode of war on the other. So there's this conflicting theoretical world indicating the Islamic law, while in fact reality is much more complicated. Again, self-advertisement. My coming up article. Well, you got to sell yourself, right? This impedes us to see the divergence between theory and practice of Ottoman diplomacy with European powers, and reduce our treatment of a complicated and multicultural phenomenon such as Mediterranean Corso to a Huntingtonian approach of clash of civilizations. Finally, the third reason could be an obvious parallel with their Christian brethren, the organized around just religious monastic orders such as Knights of St. John and Knights of St. Stephen. But, however, this also is something that is very problematic because North Africa is neither Malta nor Pisa, and we're talking about a much bigger enterprise with a much more diverse background, much more pluralistic society. It's even called a republic of renegades. And so today I try to demonstrate the heterogeneous nature of the Western Mediterranean borderlands, where the traditional religious frontiers, theoretical products of central governments and their propaganda practices, simply collapse. They are fluid. And the center-frontier dichotomy, whereas the language of the center, the Gaza, is imposed upon the frontier, right, who employ this language to justify the empire's political and economic advantages that of cooperation with them. And the modus operandi of these corsairs, I can't even understand what I'm sorry about that. Motives of these self-seeking entrepreneur corsairs of diverse ethnic, religious, and geographical background, which Ottoman historiography easily collapsed into a single category, that of Ghazis. And this is a misrepresentation. Thank you very much.